Hey, it's Kai. I'm coming at you again in the same outfit as I wore in the previous video because I am actually filming these back to back. I actually want to do a review on a book that I just finished. I actually have it right here. It is the Steel Crow Saga by Krueger. It is an adult fantasy set in kind of like a post-war industrial era. I was actually going to read this for the 2020 Asian Readathon back in May that Read with Cindy was hosting, but I actually got sidetracked by a bunch of other books. So I didn't read this until I didn't start reading this until I think like July, earlier this month at least. Not this month, it's August now. But yeah, so basically it is an adult fantasy. It is set right after a war has taken place. Each of the kind of countries involved in this war are directly based off an Asian culture. So the major players are Tomoda, which is basically like Fantasy Japan, Shang, which is like Fantasy China, Jongson, which is like Fantasy Korea, and then it has the Sanbu Republic, which is actually based off of the Philippines. Paul Krueger himself is a Filipino, I believe, and it was actually really nice to see, I'm Filipino, by the way, new information. So it was really nice to see kind of my culture represented in like a fantasy setting. It's really hard to find it represented in fiction in general, so seeing it in like a fantasy world, it was really exciting to me. Krueger wrote in a lot of little details about like Filipino culture to kind of flesh it out, and I really appreciated it. There were like a lot of like little points that rang familiar to me. Stuff about like how we like to like eat with our hands, or how we mostly just call each other by like nicknames instead of like our full names. Just little things like that. I thought it was really nice just to see that. Anyways, so the basic plot of the story is that Tomoda, aka like Fantasy Japan, had kind of colonized the its surrounding countries. So the Sanbu Republic and Shang and Jongson were all kind of like under their rule, and those countries, excluding Jongson, plus another country named Dahal, had kind of come together and like successfully overthrew Tomoda, basically. So this is kind of after the war, and they are starting peace talks. Each of the four POV characters, there are four POV characters by the way, are they each represent a different one of these cultures. So you have Tala, who is from Sanbu. So she is kind of like a Sanbuna freedom fighter who had been promoted to like a general during the war. And she is tasked, she and her squad that she commands, is tasked with delivering the second POV character, Prince Jumuro, back to his home country. Prince Jumuro is the Tomodanese crown prince, and he had been like a prisoner of war for at least part of the war. He was captured during the war, and now he is being released to kind of ascend the throne and participate in peace talks. He is the only alive remaining member of the Tomodanese like royal family. His parents and his older sister had all died during the war, so it's him now. Then there is a Shulan, who is the one of the Shang princesses. There are like 30 royal children, and she's like the 28th one. And she learns of this kind of delivery. This is being done in secret, by the way. So she learns that a Prince Jimuro is being kind of delivered back to Tomoda, and she wants to kind of like intercept that and deliver Jimuro to her father, who is the Crane Emperor of Shang. And then she enlists the final POV character, Lee, who is Zhongsonese, and she is a thief by trade, and kind of like recruits her to kind of help her on this journey. I was, when I picked up the book, I kind of thought it would be like a group dynamic, like all four of them would spend the majority of the book together. I really like group dynamics in books, just kind of like the kind of interpersonal web there. I don't know, I think it's fun, but actually it's more of like a pair-in-pair situation. So Tala and Prince Jimuro have most of the book together, and then Shulan and Lee spend most of the book together. They all kind of come together kind of briefly, but it's not until like the halfway mark, maybe past the halfway mark even. They're not really like a cohesive unit, you know, it's more like 2 and 2. So yeah, which I wouldn't say it's a point against it, it's just not what I was expecting. So yeah, I think that the character writing was really good. Each of the POV characters kind of get their own kind of focus, and I like how they were chosen because they each kind of represent a different kind of position in society, and they all kind of represent just kind of where their country's positions are. So the Sanbuna, so Tala, who is Sanbuna, Tala joins the Freedom Fighters. She's always kind of wanted to join the Freedom Fighters. Jungle Runners is what they're called. Because she's always just kind of lived under Tomodani's occupation. And then there is an event that kind of sets off her resolve to fight the Tomodanis. They are now, after the war, they have kind of given themselves like an independent state. They're kind of like establishing like themselves as like a standalone kind of country after being occupied. The Shang are kind of like they're in a different position where they had been under Tomodani's rule, but they also they also like ruled over the Zhongsonese. So Zhongson is in like a position where they are essentially like second-class citizens. They were second-class citizens both under Shang rule and under Tomodani's rule. They don't really have any like, they're not really afforded any like social mobility. And even after the war, and even after the Tomodanis had been kind of driven off, they're still kind of living in like, they've got like a raw deal basically. And then the Tomodanis are like a former now empire that had lost the war, and now they're kind of having to deal with like the repercussions of doing so. Just kind of like that loss of like power. I think that the marketing for this book had compared it both to Avatar and Pokemon. I don't really get the Pokemon one. I think it's because of the magic system, which I'll get into in a bit. But the Avatar one, the setting is more like Legend of Korra, where it's like they've got like cars and like electricity and stuff like that. But it is also, I can definitely see theme-wise why you would say it's similar to Atla, because it does touch a lot on like those kind of themes of like colonialization and kind of both how living under it would affect someone, and also someone who has been complicit in it realizing that they've been complicit in it and kind of taking responsibility for that. So I definitely get that comparison. So the magic system is basically, so both the Sunbuna and the Shang have this ability called shade pacting. Basically, you find like an animal, any animal, and you kind of connect your soul to theirs. The animal will request something of you, just something that they want. And if you agree to their terms, then you can bond yourself with them, and they will kind of essentially become like a part of you, and you can call on them at any time to kind of do stuff on your behalf. So they're used for fighting sometimes, which I suppose is part of the Pokemon comparison, but like you don't really soul bond with your Pokemon. So that kind of, the similarities stop there. I would compare it more to like, I forgot the name of that one series, but like, you know, the one with the daemons? It's more of like a kind of spiritual connection there, I guess. You can, the characters that start out the series with their own shades, Tala and Shulan, can kind of feel what their shades are feeling and hear what their shades are thinking. So it's kind of more intimate. And then the Tomodanis frown upon this very, very much. It's a practice that they find repulsive, basically. And they have their own kind of ability called metal pacting, which is essentially like metal bending. They can commune with different types of metal and then kind of get it to work for them. For that reason, they are very good with guns and cars and stuff like that. Also, I really like how this book has kind of handled LGBT representation in general. It's very casual. There is not any like in-universe like homophobia or like stigma against same-gender couples, as I've seen in like several other like fantasy series. Actually, two of the POV characters, Princess Shulan and Lee, are each other's love interests, and I thought that their relationship was actually one of the best aspects of the book in general. Like I have seen romances, like the romance trope of like the royal and the thief or criminal or whatever. It is established, but I haven't seen it with two women before in a book, and I thought that was really cool. I liked their dynamic a lot. Lee is a very kind of world-weary, I guess, character. She's very jaded from having to live both in poverty and as a criminal, kind of out of necessity, because there's not really much else that she can do in her position. And she's very bold. She's not really afraid to kind of point out when she is being kind of patronized or whatever. So she kind of makes up the more street smart, not street smart. Yes, street smart. That's actually exactly what I meant to say. I don't know why I felt like I had to backtrack there. She also has like a kind of, from her past experiences with having relationships with like other people kind of in her like social sphere of other like thieves or cons, she's kind of like built up this like kind of leave them before they leave you mentality. So she's not really she's fine with like flirting with Shulan, but she has a lot more she's a lot more reluctant to think about her as a committed partner, so it scares her when she does start thinking of her that way. And Shulan, on the other hand, is, I wouldn't say sheltered necessarily, but she is a little bit kind of, she lived as a princess in the Shang courts. She is one of like 30 something siblings, and she tries to help distinguish herself by joining this like task force, this elite task force, as like a detective. And she's very clever, and she knows she's very clever. She's very smart in like a certain way, but she can be also at times kind of naive. I wouldn't even say that naive is necessarily the right word either. It's more like she expects situations to be a certain way and gets sort of thrown off when they're not actually. She is a huge fan of these like detective novels, so much so that she kind of models her worldview around them, like her understanding of how stuff is going to work out. And she kind of also models like her appearance after like the main character too. She wears like these suits, and she smokes a pipe like the character does, and she wears like a it's not a fedora, but like, you know, those trilby hats is what they're called. I don't know hats. I don't. But yeah, I thought that Lee was going to be my favorite character from the outset, but it might actually be Shulan. I don't get me wrong, I really, really like Lee too, but I feel like Shulan is just a very fun character to be in like the POV of. The kind of relationship that the two have, they both are very drawn to each other, and they're both also very not used to having someone like the other. Shulan grew up in a court of like 30 other siblings who she cannot necessarily trust, because whoever inherits the Korean Emperor's title is based less on like birth order, more so on like personal favor. So all of the different siblings are basically like vying for their father's favor so that they can kind of move up on the like line of inheritance. And Shulan's like whole motivation at the start of the book is trying to get some of that favor, because her older sister Rome is kind of trying to intercept Prince Jamuro's passage as well, but she's going to, or at least Shulan thinks that she is going to kill him. That's what her plan is. So she wants to find Jamuro and deliver him to her father before her sister can kill him. And that sister is the second princess, as opposed to Shulan, who was the 28th princess. So she thinks that if she were to kind of best her sister in that way, then it would give her like a huge leg up. And so basically, I'm getting off track here, but so she has like 30 something like siblings or half siblings that she can't really like trust, or like servants, or just not really people that she can have like a connection with. And Lee is just kind of the first person that she can kind of call like a friend even. And like, even if she's not like, even if they're like on kind of different levels, like socioeconomically, drastically different levels, she still kind of sees Lee as like a partner, like an equal. And Lee, whose like whole deal I touched on earlier, is also kind of not used to having someone like Shulan who might actually like have like a lasting thing. She's never had a lasting thing, so they're both just kind of like in this. Something I really appreciated about like how their relationship was written is how it wasn't like fully resolved by the end of the book. Spoilers. You know what? I'm putting a spoiler tag here. I'm putting a spoiler tag here. This is gonna be a spoilery review. I just decided that. Okay, so their relationship did not get resolved fully at the end of the book. Not in like an unhappy way, like they are together. They get together like over the course of the book. They have their first kiss like maybe 200 pages in, but they don't become like kind of officially an item towards the end, until towards the end. And even when they are like an item, it's kind of, it's emphasized that they do have stuff to work on with each other, with their relationship, because Shulan suspects Lee of like running off, because that's established to be like a problem with Lee, and Lee has an issue with kind of whether she should run. It's very, they have to work on like trusting each other still. Even though they're together, it's kind of implied that they're going to keep working on stuff in the future. And I really like in stories where even though it's like a happy ending, like in terms of like the romance, it's still kind of like pointed out that they are both people with flaws. So even though they are in this new relationship, they will have stuff to kind of work on and communicate with each other about. So yeah, I thought it was really nice. I feel like the relationship between Tala and Jimuro, flipping over to them, is a lot more antagonistic at the outset, because Jimuro himself starts out the book kind of having fully bought into the like kind of propaganda about his country that he's been kind of fed for his whole life. He believes the kind of like, he's still got the kind of imperialist mindset that his people were simply like civilizing these other cultures and helping them by showing them a better culture, and that the Sanbuna and the Shang are just like ungrateful savages who didn't appreciate what they were doing for them, even though essentially they were subjugating them. So he has like all of these very xenophobic beliefs about like the Sanbuna in particular, and with Tala being Sanbuna, you can see where this is going. They have like this very clear tension between the two, that is definitely understandable, because one person is the only surviving member of a royal family that he's grieving, and he kind of blames the people of Sanbu and Shang and Dahal for kind of rising up against his family, and on top of that also believes that they are kind of innately inferior. And Tala also has like a lot of justified anger against Jimuro, as like an extension of her anger against Tomoda for kind of tearing her own family apart and affecting her life very negatively. So it's a very different tension than what Shulan and Lee have, because at the outset, Lee is very aware of the position that the Jongsonis have, and she's very honest about how she feels about that. She's justifiably angry about it, and Shulan accepts that. Like, she wants to kind of use her position to kind of help, and at the very least there's like a kind of understanding that this is a problem, and Shulan wants to help fix it. Jimuro does not want to help fix the problem because he does not believe that there is a problem that he is accountable for. So the early Jimuro chapters for me were very difficult because there was a lot of like calling Tala like a savage or like a barbarian and like just shit like that, and just kind of like talking about the Sanbuna like they're like this violent people that just started a war for no reason, and his character arc is kind of like trying to unlearn that, and Tala helps him unlearn that. I did really like Jimuro's character arc, how he kind of grew, how he kind of like started to both like unlearn his like xenophobic racist beliefs, and also kind of like come to terms with his own kind of anxiety about becoming the next Steel Lord, which is like the ruling title of like the Tomodanese monarch, basically, and kind of dealing with his grief about his family, because sometimes fiction does a thing where there will be a character who is bigoted against a marginalized group within that like universe, and the reason they are bigoted is because they lost their family or like something equally tragic, and the people in question are like to blame for it, so they are transferring their personal tragedy over to like the entire people, like generalizing it to that. It is not that it's not that his beliefs are caused by his grief, but his grief just exacerbates them. He does believe at the outset that the Sanbuna and the Shang are like savages, but that is just something he has been taught all his life, and not something that has come as like a result of something. I don't know if I explained that correctly, but you know. So yeah, I think that they're kind of like enemies to maybe lovers thing was, I don't dislike it, but I do feel like the relationship aspect of it was kind of rushed, but I do like how it kind of accelerated or helped kind of kick off his character development. Speaking of his character development, there is also a character named Kosuke. He is Jimuro's childhood friend, and he is a canonical trans character. I don't think I can personally speak on whether he is good representation, but I did appreciate that Kosuke's like story was not kind of about like a voyeuristic angst surrounding it. Kosuke is the leader of the Steel Cicadas, which is basically a group of children from different Tomodanese noble families who have kind of banded together with the goal of like taking Tomoda back. They brand themselves as like vigilantes, but it's very clear from the start that they are mostly just very inexperienced, young, violent nationalists. And Kosuke, being their leader, kind of represents like the conflict that Jimuro has between like, is he going to embrace like the familiarity of being back in his home country and having people who support him while still believing the beliefs that he has held on to? Or is he going to kind of make the choice to grow and to try and accept that he is in part accountable for the pain that these other countries have been caused, and that instead of embracing familiarity, it might be a better but harder path to try to change like in his reign, try and move past or take a different path, at least from like the reign that his country has held beforehand. So Kosuke and the Steel Cicadas all kind of embrace Jimuro, and it's kind of like a point of comfort for him, but like it's something that has come at the price of like him learning that they're not actually like very noble or like good intentioned. So yeah. So to go back to Kosuke himself, the sort of first meeting that he has with Jimuro is like, they come across each other when Tala and Jimuro arrive in Tomoda, and when they meet, Kosuke's like, hey, it's me. You knew me as a kid, and that was like before I transitioned, but I'm Kosuke and I'm a dude. And it's just kind of like, okay. There's not really like any event made out of it. It's not treated as like a huge deal. I did appreciate at the very least how instead of like being treated as like the trans character, he is more so just treated as a character who happens to be trans. I guess my thing is that even though I don't think there was anything overtly transphobic in how Kosuke was written, from what I remember at least, it does also stand out a lot that he is a thoroughly unsympathetic character while also being the only canonical trans character. I think this comes up a lot with representation in general. Like, if there is only one character to represent a minority, then it all just kind of falls on them. And like, it's fine for, say, like a like non-white character to be like a bad person if there are a lot of other characters of color in the cast and they're just one of them. But if they are the only non-white character in the entire cast and they're a bad person, then that's kind of like, that really does like stand out too. Also, yes, my eyes are swollen because Chaboy's been crying. Although that being said, I don't like his character very much because of how he represents like that kind of like bigoted mindset that Jimuro has to grow past in order to advance himself as a person. The prejudices that Jimuro holds during the book, Kosuke has that, but it's like up to like 11. And during the Tala chapters, he is so like in-your-face racist that I kind of end up skimming a lot of those chapters that he is in, where he is interacting with Tala or another like non-Tomodanese character, because of that. So yeah, he's not necessarily an antagonist, but he's not really a good character either. So yeah, I do also like that Jimuro isn't like straight, and that is kind of that's kind of demonstrated by the fact that Kosuke does have romantic feelings for Jimuro, and Jimuro does return those feelings, even though it doesn't like work out because of the whole like horrible ideology thing that is. So yeah, to go off of side characters, I want to jump back to Shulan. This is a very incoherent review, by the way. I have notes, but I organized them very poorly, so I'm just off the cuff most of it. I had mentioned Shulan's older sister earlier, Rome, who is kind of their father's favorite. She's the second princess, and that Shulan was trying to kind of beat her out in order to gain their father's approval, which is kind of what Shulan's been trying to do like for a very, very long time. So Rome is kind of built up in Shulan's perspective as like sorry, like the Azula of the thing, like just a very cruel and like ruthless figure. And while their relationship isn't good necessarily, it turns out to be a little bit more complex than we are kind of first expecting it to be. When Rome first shows up in the book itself, one of the first things she does is say something protective to Kosuke on Shulan's behalf. It's a weird kind of thing where she does see Shulan as like competition and does want to like keep her down, but at the same time she is also kind of older sisterly in some ways. So I really did appreciate that it was more kind of layered than you would think. Also, in one of the later lead chapters, it's kind of revealed that Rome does hold a similar respect for the Jongsonese people as Shulan does, and it is implied might also want to kind of help their position in society as well, and that she might not be like a tyrannical ruler like her father is. So it's not good, but it's complicated, and I did like that. Another cool thing about Rome that I picked up on is that her physical description, she is described as having like thick limbs and like a round, like moon-like face, and she is described by Shulan as like the standard of beauty. And I thought it was really nice that what is considered beautiful isn't like thin in this culture. Oh yeah. Okay, so I think I've mentioned a couple times that one of the other countries who participated in the one of the other countries that have participated in the rebellion against Tomoda is Dahal, who I don't really know if they have like a clear cultural counterpart the same way Tomoda is like Fantasy Japan and the Sanbu Islands are like the Fantasy Philippines, but my closest guess was like South Asian inspired, but I'm not entirely sure. So in the book, they are kind of described as a very like mercantile people, and that's not really that's really kind of the only thing about them. They don't come up much in the book itself, and there's only like 2 named Dahali characters. And I feel like there's a lot of like different kind of prejudices and stereotypes against the different cultures in this book, like the Sanbuna being kind of characterized as like kind of barbaric in the eyes of the Timodanese, or like how the Zhongsanese are viewed by like everybody. But those are challenged by the fact that there are POV characters representing these cultures to kind of like combat it, to kind of be like, that's not how it's actually like. And you don't really get that with the Dahali. There's not really much to challenge, like the whole stereotype of them just being like super mercantile, and like there's not much else to them other than that like characteristic. And if we had even like, not necessarily even like a POV character, but like just a more prominent like side character even, who was Dahali, I feel like we would have a more fleshed out idea of who the Dahali are as a people, because it is a book that challenges these kind of like assumptions, and I feel like that kind of like very simplistic characterization of a culture, I feel like they could have done a lot more with it, basically. So yeah, that's one of my only issues with the book itself. I don't have a lot more gripes with the book in general. Other than that thing I brought up earlier about Jimuro and Tala's relationship perhaps advancing too fast. They don't get together at the end of the book, but Jimuro does become like kind of enamored with Tala in a way where it feels too much like it feels like too quick and dramatic of a change of heart from the start of the book. They are separated for like a good chunk of the book, so I feel like if they spent more time together kind of learning each other's cultures and stuff like that, sorry, my battery, kind of like learning each other's cultures and stuff like that, and kind of getting to know each other as people, I would feel less like that was a little bit rushed. Because even though Shulan and Lee get separated too, they don't start the book out as enemies, so I feel like there was less, you know, less work to be done on that front. So, you know, that is basically all of it. I'm trying to think of other things, other comments that I have. Lee, when I first picked up the book, I was a little bit concerned about Lee's name, because Lee is a Korean surname. It's a family name, not a given name. So the Zhongsunese character going by Lee, I was a little bit scared about that like maybe the author just gave them a surname without thinking. But she does have like personal character reasons for going by her family name. Her like given name is Yonji, so yeah. Dispelled that fear. Anything else? I do like, this is a spoiler, I do like that by the end of the book, all 4 of the main characters had shades of their own, which was really nice. And they all kind of subverted, not subverted, but they all kind of challenged the practice of shade pacting in their own kind of ways. Tala, I don't want to get into it because it's a huge plot thing, so I'm not gonna get into that, but it is a huge thing, and she does have kind of like, she does commit like a huge taboo in her culture when it comes to her shade. And then Shulan, all of the members of the Shang royal family shade pact traditionally with cranes because they have a whole crane theme, but Shulan chose to make a pact with her pet rat, Ko, and it's made her stand out a lot more amongst her siblings who already kind of like ostracized her a little bit. Li, I mentioned earlier, as the Zhongsonese people did not have any access to the practice of shade pacting, so her being able to get a shade of her own was like kind of a big thing. And then lastly, this doesn't happen until, like, another spoiler, but like this doesn't happen until the like end stretch of the book, but Jimuro makes a pact during like a third act fight with a cicada, and it's very significant because, as I've mentioned earlier, the Tomodanese have a huge stigma against the practice of shade pacting, and they find it repulsive. So Jimuro, the Steel Lord, pacting is like a big deal pretty much. I just thought it was really cool because shades are like really like one of the only magical elements of this universe, so having all four of the main characters kind of challenging it in some way, not challenging it, but kind of engaging with it in a way that is kind of like not in the traditional sphere of things. I thought that was really cool. So yeah, I definitely recommend it if you are a fan of like fantasy but not like high fantasy. I would definitely give it a read. If you are looking for more like Asian inspired fantasy, I would also definitely pick it up. I think anyone who also kind of wants to see like a good like female romance, where there's kind of like a lot of banter and a lot of like kind of like partnership dynamics, I would pick it up for Shulan and Li alone. But yeah, I think I definitely do not regret picking it up, and while it's not like something that I'm going to like reread 7,000 times, I'm definitely really happy that I have it and I read it. I haven't come up with a specific outro yet, so I guess I'll just catch you later. Thanks for watching!